Picture this moment. It's Saturday afternoon, 1996, West Baltimore. You're walking down the street when the smell hits you. Smoky, savory, absolutely mouthwatering. Your stomach growls. You follow that scent to a roadside barbecue stand where a friendly guy is flipping meat on an open pit grill. Best roast beef sandwich in Baltimore, someone tells you. Try it. There's something special about his meat. So you hand over a few dollars. You take that first bite. The meat is tender, perfectly seasoned, unlike anything you've ever tasted. You go back for seconds. But here's the question that will haunt you. What if that special ingredient wasn't a secret spice blend? What if it was human flesh? In the mid-1990s, a serial killer operated in the shadows of one of America's most violent neighborhoods. His name was Joseph Metheny, and according to his own chilling confession, he didn't just murder at least 10 people. He butchered them. He stored their meat in Tupperware containers, and he served them to unsuspecting customers who lined up at his barbecue stand, never knowing they might be eating their neighbors, their friends, or even their own family members. Was it true? Or was it the twisted fantasy of a man desperate to become the most infamous killer in American history? Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will make you question everything you think you know about evil. This is the story of the BBQ Stand Killer, and I promise you, the truth is somehow worse than the legend. Before we descend into this nightmare, I need you to do something for me right now. See that subscribe button glowing on your screen? Hit it right now, and smash that like button while you're at it. Why? Because this story, and the stories we're bringing you every week, aren't just entertainment. These are deep investigations into cases the media glosses over. The kind of content that takes weeks of research and analysis. And tap that notification bell. Seriously, don't skip this, because we're investigating some of the most disturbing cases in criminal history. You don't want to miss what we're uncovering. Uncover the truth behind the legend of the BBQ Stand Killer. Let's do this together. Now, let's enter the nightmare. To understand the monster, you first need to understand the hunting ground. West Baltimore, Maryland, the 1990s. If you've seen the HBO series The Wire, you already know this neighborhood. But what you see on TV, that's sanitized compared to the reality. By the mid-90s, West Baltimore had become a war zone. Baltimore itself was the third most violent city in America, and this neighborhood was ground zero. But it wasn't always like this. Rewind to the 1940s and 50s. West Baltimore was thriving, an industrial powerhouse known as the Garment District. Department stores lined the streets. Pennsylvania Avenue became one of the East Coast's Black Broadways, a cultural mecca for African-American entertainers and musicians. Jazz clubs, theaters, hope. Then came deindustrialization. Factories closed, jobs vanished. Suburban shopping malls drained the neighborhood's economy. By the 1980s, the crack epidemic hit like a bomb, and West Baltimore descended into chaos. Gang violence exploded. Homeless encampments spread like urban cancer. Community structures collapsed. Murder rates soared. The police, overwhelmed, outgunned, often corrupt. This wasn't just a bad neighborhood. This was a place where people could disappear and nobody would notice. Nobody would care. And that's exactly what Joseph Metheny was counting on. Born March 2, 1955 in Essex, Maryland, Joe Metheny seemed almost normal at first. One of 6 kids in a poor family. His father was an alcoholic who died in a car crash when Joe was only 6. His mother worked brutal hours, sometimes 16-hour shifts, just to keep her children fed. Joe would later claim his childhood was a horror show. He said his parents essentially fostered the kids out to other families. He told people his mother was dead. All lies. His mother fought back against these claims, insisting she sacrificed everything for those children. She remembered Joe as a bright student, polite, well-mannered, above average. But something was broken inside Joseph Metheny, something that couldn't be seen from the outside. At 18, he joined the army, stationed in Germany, a normal military stint. But later, Joe fabricated an entire backstory. He claimed he served in Vietnam as a field artillery soldier. He said he became addicted to heroin overseas, that the war destroyed him. Complete fiction. By 1973, when Joe enlisted, America's involvement in Vietnam had essentially ended. Only about 50 soldiers remained there. So why lie? Maybe he needed a tragic origin story. Maybe he wanted to justify the addiction that would consume him. Or maybe, just maybe, he was already practicing the art of deception that would serve him so well as a killer. When Joe returned stateside, he became 2 people. By day, An intelligent, well-spoken forklift driver. Reliable. Funny. The kind of guy who sang badly to the radio and played pranks on his coworkers, like hiding a fish in someone's truck. By night, a different creature entirely. He haunted Baltimore's bars and homeless camps. Every dollar he earned went to crack, heroin, or his drink of choice, an entire bottle of Southern Comfort. Every single night. In 1988, Joe started dating a fellow drug user. They had a son together. Moved in. Joe got a steady job as a forklift driver at Joe Stein & Sons Pallet Factory, a small industrial operation tucked away near Kyton and Washington Avenues. For a moment, life seemed almost stable. But in the summer of 1994, Joe came home to find his girlfriend and son gone, vanished without a word. For most people, this would be devastating, heartbreaking. For Joseph Metheny, it was permission. Permission to unleash something dark he'd been keeping caged inside. Or maybe, something that had been waiting for the perfect excuse all along. He later said, "If she'd just left our son with my mother, none of this would have happened." It was the kind of justification that made perfect sense to a psychopath, and it was about to get much, much worse. Around the time his girlfriend left, Joe convinced his boss to let him move into a small trailer on the property of the pallet factory. The official story? He'd work as nighttime security. But Joe later admitted he knew exactly what he was doing. That trailer, surrounded by a chain-link fence, hidden in an industrial wasteland far from prying eyes, was perfect for what he had planned. It was July 1994 when he brought Kathy Magaziner to that trailer. She was 39 years old, a woman with a history, like everyone in West Baltimore. Kathy had graduated high school on South Bay Island in Lake Erie back in 1969. That summer, she left for California with stars in her eyes, telling her friends she was going to become a model. But Hollywood dreams die hard and fast. By 1980, Kathy was in Baltimore, divorced and spiraling. Prescription pills led to heroin. Heroin led to the streets. She worked as a sex worker to feed her addiction. That's how she ended up in Joe Metheny's trailer. After they had sex, Joe's hands wrapped around her throat. She passed out. Then he grabbed an extension cord, looped it around her neck, and pulled until she stopped breathing. He took the cash from her wallet. Then he dragged her naked body into the small strip of woods behind the factory and buried her in a shallow 2-foot grave. Clothes and purse, hidden elsewhere. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. 6 months later, Joe dug her up. He removed her skull from the decomposing corpse. And according to his later confession, he attempted to use it for sexual gratification before throwing it in a trash container. This wasn't just murder. This was desecration. This was a man treating a human being like an object, like meat. And that word, meat, is about to become very, very important. One body wasn't enough. The summer of 1995, Joe crossed the Patapsco River to Brooklyn Park, heading to a place beneath the Hanover Bridge, Reed Bird Island Sanctuary. But sanctuary is a joke. At that time, it was home to Tent City, a sprawling homeless encampment. Baltimore's most vulnerable people living in makeshift shelters, forgotten by society. Joe knew this place. His ex used to come here to score drugs. And according to Joe, he'd been stalking the streets of Baltimore, searching for her. He wanted revenge. One night beneath that bridge, Joe found two men, Randall Brewer and Randy Piker. Now, Joe told two different versions of what happened next, and this is important. Version 1. He questioned them about his ex's whereabouts. Something they said enraged him. In a fit of anger, he murdered them both with an axe. Version 2. He knew they had about $300 cash. He went there planning to rob and kill them. Both men ended up dead, skulls crushed. But Joe wasn't done. According to his confession, never fully proven, he lured a sex worker to the bridge, questioned her about his ex, sexually assaulted her, strangled her, then another sex worker. Same pattern. But as he was hiding her body with the others, Joe looked up and froze. An African-American man was fishing nearby. Had he seen everything? Joe couldn't risk it. He grabbed a steel pipe and beat the potential witness to death. 3, possibly 5 people dead in one night. Joe weighted their bodies down with rocks and dumped them into the river. 2 weeks later, someone followed a putrid smell to find Randall Brewer and Randy Piker's rotting corpses under a mattress. The next morning, another homeless man, Everett Dowell, was found dead on South Hanover Street, killed by axe wounds. Police arrested a man named Larry Amos at the scene. He had the murder weapon. But despite this, authorities arrested Joe Metheny for the double murder. He spent 18 months in jail until charges were dropped. Insufficient evidence. Was Joe guilty? Almost certainly. But proving it? That was another story. November 1996. Joe walked free and returned to that trailer at the pallet factory. And that's when the legend of the BBQ Stand Killer was truly born. Before we continue, I need you to understand something crucial about this case. What I'm about to tell you next is the part that made Joseph Metheny infamous. It's the detail that turns this from a tragic serial killer case into something that lives in nightmares. But here's the question: is it true? Joe Metheny confessed to operating a barbecue stand where he served human flesh to customers. He described it in detail, how he butchered his victims, stored the meat, mixed it with pork and beef, and sold sandwiches to people who had no idea what they were eating. But this claim never appeared in court documents. It was never proven. It exists only in Joe's jailhouse writings that contradicted themselves constantly. So was he telling the truth? Or was he crafting a legend, making himself into a monster so terrifying that his name would live forever? Think about it. If you were a killer desperate for infamy, what better story could you tell? What's more horrifying than the idea that dozens, maybe hundreds, of people unknowingly consumed human flesh? Here's what we know for certain: Joe continued killing, and what he did to his next victims is proven, documented, and absolutely horrific. Quick reminder, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button now. Over 70% of you watching are not subscribed yet, and that's wild to me because you're clearly interested in true crime content. Subscribing takes 2 seconds and ensures you never miss an investigation like this. Now, before I reveal what happened next, tell me in the comments, do you think Joe was telling the truth about the barbecue stand? Or was it all a calculated lie to boost his infamy? Drop your theory below. I want to know what you're thinking. Also, if you're enjoying this deep dive, share this video with someone who loves true crime. Now let's get back to the nightmare, because what happened next is where fiction and fact collide in the most disturbing way possible. While Joe was in jail for those 18 months, he learned something that twisted the knife deeper. His ex-girlfriend and her pimp had been arrested for drug dealing. His son, the child he claimed to care so much about, was now in foster care. The very thing he said he'd been trying to prevent had happened anyway. When Joe got out in November 1996, something changed. Or maybe nothing changed. Maybe he'd always been this way. He moved back into that trailer at the Joe Stein Pallet Company, and according to multiple sources, he started operating a weekend barbecue stand. Some say it was near the corner of Kyton and James Streets, just down from his trailer. Others claim he traveled to different events around Baltimore, setting up his grill wherever crowds gathered. And according to Joe's own confession, he had a secret ingredient. He claimed he would butcher parts of his victims, thighs, buttocks, arms, and store the meat in Tupperware containers in his trailer. He'd mix it with pork and beef, season it, and serve it to customers who raved about how good it tasted. Special meat, he allegedly called it. He wrote that whenever he was running low on his supply, he'd go out hunting for another victim. Now I need to emphasize again, this was never proven in court. There's no forensic evidence. No victims were found butchered in this way. It exists only in Joe's confessions. But what we know for certain is that Joe kept killing. November 11, 1996, 26-year-old Kimberly Spicer stormed out of her mother's house on Heron Street, less than a mile from Joe's trailer. Kim and her mother had been fighting about Kim's drug addiction. The pain was fresh and raw. Kim's brother had died from an overdose just 2 weeks earlier. Angry, grieving, and desperate, Kim headed to Uncle Walt's bar on Washington Boulevard. That night, Joe Metheny was there too, drinking his Southern comfort. They talked. They connected. Two people drowning in their own ways. Joe offered drugs back at his place. Kim agreed. They hitched a ride back to the trailer. But once inside, Kim never stood a chance. Joe stabbed her 26 times. Then he raped her corpse. Finally, in an act of pure sadism, he shoved an empty beer bottle inside her vagina, wrapped her body in a red tarp, and dragged it under a truck trailer parked nearby. Kimberly Spicer lay there, decomposing in the Maryland heat, while Joe went about his business. Did he butcher her? Did pieces of Kim end up in sandwiches sold to unsuspecting customers? We'll never know for certain. Less than a month later, December 8, 1996, Joe brought 37-year-old Rita Kemper back to his trailer. Rita and Joe had done drugs together before. She trusted him, at least enough to come back to his place. But when Joe made sexual advances, Rita said no. She tried to run. Joe caught her, dragged her back inside, and began beating her during his attempted assault. And then he said something that revealed the full scope of his killing spree. "I'm going to kill you and bury you in the woods with the other girls." The other girls. How many were there? How many bodies were buried in those woods that were never found? But Rita Kemper wasn't going to be another victim. She fought back with everything she had. She broke free, jumped through a window, and scaled the barbed wire fence, tearing her skin but not caring. She flagged down a police car. Rita survived, and because of her courage, Joe Metheny's nightmare was about to end. But not in the way you'd think. Here's where this story takes an unexpected turn. When Rita Kemper escaped and reported Joe to the police, they didn't immediately arrest him. Why? Because the Joe Stein Pallet Company had been under FBI surveillance for over a year. Let me take you back and explain. Joe Stein, nicknamed Reds, wasn't just Joe Metheny's boss. He was a career criminal with a rap sheet dating back decades. He'd done 10 years for burglary. After his release, he enlisted his own 13-year-old son into his crimes, using the boy's small size to break into pharmacies and steal pills they'd sell on the streets. Father and son cycled in and out of jail for years until the late 1980s, when Stein opened the pallet company. On paper, they repaired and sold broken wooden pallets. But behind the scenes, Stein was running a massive stolen goods operation. Truckloads of merchandise from Solo Cup, GE, Sweetheart Cup, Knorr Corporation, Beverage Capital. He also dealt drugs and guns. In 1995, Joe Stein's own son had enough. He turned his father in to the FBI and agreed to wear a wire. The FBI set up surveillance. They recorded illegal deals. They watched stolen merchandise flow through the property. They were building an airtight case against Joe Stein and his entire operation. And then, in mid-December 1996, everything accelerated. An employee came forward with a horrifying report. Joe Metheny had approached him, asking for help disposing of a body. The employee said Joe had lifted a red tarp to show him Kimberly Spicer's decomposing corpse underneath a truck trailer. The FBI couldn't wait any longer. They had to move. December 15, 1996, Joe Stein and Joe Metheny were leaving their company Christmas party at Martin's East event venue. Police moved in 3 blocks from the pallet factory, at the 1700 block of Inverness Street. Both Joes were arrested. Stein was charged as an accessory after the fact. Authorities believed he helped clean up the bloody trailer and dispose of evidence. But it was Joe Metheny who opened up Pandora's box. In custody, Joe started talking, and what he said shook investigators to their core. He claimed he'd killed 10 people, maybe more. His first murder? A man in a bar fight back in 1976. 2 sex workers in 1988 and 1989, dumped in the Patapsco River. 3 people beneath the Hanover Bridge, weighted down with rocks. Divers searched the river extensively. They found nothing. In early 1997, Joe was brought back to the pallet company. He said there was a 3rd body buried on the property. Police searched for 4 hours. They found some clothing. No body. Joe's stories kept changing. His victim count fluctuated. Descriptions didn't match known disappearances. Investigators began to suspect Joe was embellishing, inflating his numbers to become more infamous. But they knew he'd killed. The question was, how many? One murder they could prove was 28-year-old Tony Ingrascia. February 26, 1994. Tony's body was found on the I-95 on-ramp from Kyton Avenue, less than 3,000 feet from the pallet company. Tony was a mother who'd struggled with drugs most of her life. She'd been fighting to get clean for months. Her family hadn't seen her since the previous November. She was found stabbed and strangled. The evidence fit. Joe was charged with her murder. But even with confessions, even with bodies, the full truth remained elusive. The trial of Joseph Metheny revealed the same duality that had defined his entire life. At times, he was the remorseful killer. He claimed he was sick and needed help. When he saw Kimberly Spicer's mother in the courthouse, he broke down crying. But then, just as quickly, the mask would fall away. He retracted his confessions. He got an inverted cross, a symbol of anti-Christian defiance, tattooed on his forehead. He stated he had no remorse whatsoever, that the words, "I'm sorry," would never pass his lips. He said he enjoyed killing. His only regret, that he hadn't killed his ex-girlfriend and her pimp, the 2 people he claimed were responsible for everything. In 1998, Joseph Metheny was found guilty, but only in the murders of Kathy Magaziner and Kimberly Spicer, along with the abduction and assault of Rita Kemper. All other charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence. At sentencing, Joe did something that shocked even seasoned prosecutors. He pleaded for the death penalty. He wanted Maryland to execute him. But 2 years later, his sentence was commuted to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Joe would spend the rest of his days behind bars, exactly what he said he didn't want. The aftermath rippled through many lives. Joe Stein Jr., who wore the wire against his own father, chose not to enter witness protection. He and his wife accepted a $60,000 settlement to relocate, allowing them to stay in touch with her family. Joe Stein Sr. got 10 years for arson, charges related to the criminal enterprise, not the murders. Kimberly Spicer's father died of a heart attack on the first day of the trial. His wife believed the stress killed him. Kathy Magaziner was cremated. Her remains were sent to Put-in-Bay, Ohio, at the request of her high school alumni association. When they learned of her murder, they offered to pay for the burial. Her mother couldn't be located, and her father had died in 1982. Even in death, Kathy wasn't forgotten by those who'd known her in better times. August 5, 2017, a guard making rounds found Joseph Metheny dead in his cell. He was 62 years old. His cause of death was never made public, though many believe he took his own life, finally achieving the death he'd begged the courts to give him years earlier. Even in death, the confusion continued. Multiple news outlets mistakenly used a photo of a different serial killer, Joseph Burdenwolf, when reporting Metheny's death. One final moment of chaos in a case defined by lies and contradictions. If you've made it this far into this investigation, you're clearly hooked on true crime content. So let me ask you, have you hit that like button yet? It takes 1 second and tells YouTube to recommend this video to more true crime fans like yourself. Also, we're building a tackle the question that's been haunting this entire case, blank_blank. So here we are at the end of this nightmare, and we're left with the question that started this whole investigation. Did Joseph Metheny really serve human flesh at his barbecue stand? Let's look at the evidence, or rather, the lack of it. Pro. Joe confessed to it in detail. He described how he butchered victims, stored the meat, and served it to customers. Why would he lie about something so specific? Con. The confession was never corroborated. No forensic evidence supported it. No victims were found butchered in this manner. The claim appears nowhere in official court documents. Here's what we know about serial killers and their confessions. They lie constantly. Some inflate their victim counts to seem more dangerous. Others confess to crimes they didn't commit, either for attention or to protect someone else. And some, like Joe Metheny, seem to craft legends around themselves. Think about it. Joe lied about serving in Vietnam. He lied about his childhood. His confessions constantly changed. He claimed 10 victims, but could only be convicted of 2 murders. He was a man who desperately wanted to be remembered as the most depraved killer in American history. And what's more depraved than serving human flesh to unsuspecting customers? It's the perfect horror story. The kind of thing that makes headlines, that gets repeated in true crime documentaries, that becomes urban legend. But here's the other possibility. What if it's true? What if dozens, maybe hundreds of people in West Baltimore unknowingly consumed human flesh in the mid-1990s? What if they went home and told their families about that amazing barbecue they'd had? What if they're still alive today, never knowing the truth? That's the genius of Joe's confession. We can never know for certain, and that uncertainty is its own kind of horror. But regardless of whether the barbecue stand story is true, here's what we know beyond any doubt. Joseph Metheny was a serial killer who targeted the most vulnerable members of society: sex workers, homeless people, drug addicts, people living in the margins, whose society had already forgotten. Kathy Magaziner had dreams of being a model. She had a family who loved her. Tony Ingrascia was fighting to get clean for her daughter. Kimberly Spicer was grieving her brother and desperately needed help, not violence. Rita Kemper fought back and survived. Her courage potentially saved lives. These women mattered. Their lives had value. And the tragedy is that in the chaos of West Baltimore in the 1990s, a neighborhood abandoned by society, drowning in drugs and violence, it was far too easy for a predator like Joe Metheny to operate. How many more victims were there that we don't know about? How many bodies are still buried in those woods or at the bottom of the Patapsco River? We may never know. Today, West Baltimore is slowly rebuilding. New housing developments are planned. A subway extension is in the works. There's hope, fragile but real, that the neighborhood can reclaim some of what it lost. But the memory of Joseph Metheny will forever be tied to one of the darkest chapters in Baltimore's history. This case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about society. We want to believe that serial killers are rare anomalies, monsters who emerge from nowhere. But the reality is that predators thrive in environments of neglect, poverty, and addiction. When society abandons entire neighborhoods, When we allow vulnerable populations to live in the shadows without protection or resources, we create hunting grounds for people like Joe Metheny. The victims in this case weren't just killed by one man, they were failed by systems that should have protected them, by a society that looked away, by a war on drugs that criminalized addiction instead of treating it. And maybe that's the most disturbing truth of all. Joe Metheny didn't operate in isolation. He operated in plain sight, in a neighborhood where violence was so common that bodies could pile up without triggering alarm bells. Either literally or metaphorically, Joe treated his victims like slabs of meat, disposable, forgettable, worthless. But they weren't. They were human beings who deserved dignity, safety, and a chance at life. Their stories matter. Their names matter. Kathy Magaziner, Tony Ingrascia, Kimberly Spicer, Randall Brewer, Randy Piker. Say their names. Remember them, not for how they died, but because they lived. As for the legend of the BBQ Stand Killer, whether it's true or not, it serves as a chilling reminder. Evil doesn't always announce itself with horns and fangs. Sometimes it smiles at you from behind a grill, offering you a sandwich, asking if you'd like another. Thank you for sticking with me through this dark, twisted investigation into one of Baltimore's most disturbing and controversial cases. If this deep dive moved you, shocked you, or made you think differently about how we treat vulnerable populations in our society, hit that like button right now. Seriously, do it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? We're bringing you meticulously researched true crime investigations every single week. Cases the mainstream media won't touch. Stories that need to be told. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next investigation. Trust me, what we have coming next is just as disturbing as this one. Click the link in the description below for exclusive bonus content on this case, research documents, crime scene locations, timelines, and photographs we couldn't fit into this video. It's completely free. Just click and explore. Now I want to hear from you in the comments. 1. Do you think Joe Metheny was telling the truth about the barbecue stand? Or was it a lie to cement his legacy? 2. What does this case teach us about how society treats its most vulnerable members? 3. Have you heard any other urban legends about serial killers that turned out to be true or false? Drop your thoughts below. I read every single comment, and I love discussing these cases with you. If you know someone who loves true crime, and let's be honest, who doesn't, share this video with them. Send it to your group chat. Post it on your story. These investigations take weeks to research and produce, and your shares genuinely help us grow this community. Before you go, check out one of these investigations on screen right now. If you found this case fascinating, you're going to love what we uncovered in those stories. Until next time, stay safe out there. Question everything you hear. Look deeper than the headlines. And remember, the most dangerous monsters aren't the ones in horror movies. They're the ones hiding in plain sight, walking among us, wearing masks of normalcy. Sometimes they're even the ones serving you lunch. Keep investigating, keep questioning, and never forget the victims.